I wanted to return to a perennial favorite here. I stumbled across some new information, well, not new to me, about the Shroud of Turin. And it got me kind of excited. I thought, well, I'll just give everybody an update. The Shroud of Turin, of course, is the long, about 12-foot long cloth that bears the front and back images of a crucified man. And to many believers, it's the burial cloth of Jesus. The big objection to the authenticity of the shroud are carbon-14 tests that were performed back in 1988. They returned a date range of 1260 to 1390, which corresponds well with the appearance of the shroud in the historical record in 1355. However, in recent years, questions have arisen regarding the samples that were used for the tests. Portions of the shroud were repaired in the medieval period using a braiding technique where they literally unwound the fibers, pulled out the damaged section, and then rewound new linen in. And the samples were taken from a portion of the shroud that had been repaired in that manner. So you have a mix of original fiber and fiber dating to, the period of the restoration. And of course, that'll give you that'll skew the date in a more recent direction, depending upon the proportion of the newer and older fibers. There's also a question regarding the sample preparation techniques that were used back in the 80s. In the 90s, there were a number of artifacts recovered from pre-Columbian sites in Mesoamerica. So these artifacts are known to date to 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago. But when they were carbon tested, they returned dates between the 16th and 19th centuries, the Spanish colonial period. And it turned out that what was happening is that the mold, bacteria, the microorganisms that live on the surfaces of these things, when they die, they can decay into this microscopically thin layer of a plastic-like material. And the sample preparation techniques that they used to use it would remove the mold and bacteria themselves, but not get at this layer, which is organic. And so it would test and skew the dates more recently. And it turns out that the samples taken from the shroud have this problem. So today, the consensus in the scientific community is that the samples taken in 1988 were less than ideal, and that the shroud is earlier than a 1360 or 1260 to 1390 date. But most scientists still feel that the problems with the samples are minor, and that the shroud's perhaps 100 years, maybe 200 years older than previously reported, but still medieval. More recently, X-ray testing using a X-ray fluorescence technology dated the shroud to the 1st century, but it's just a new technology that relies on relative testing of the sample against samples of a known age. So they have linen from mummies in Egypt that they know are 3,000 years old, and they had some linen that was recovered from Masada. And they arranged these samples and they showed X-rays on it, and then they compared that to how the sample from the shroud fluoresces, and its best match was 1st century cloth. But that's a relative technique. It's a new technique, and the database, the inventory of samples they have to compare against is still quite small. So that's it's a very interesting result, but it's not definitive. The best argument for the authenticity of the shroud is the image itself. It incorporates historically accurate details that a medieval forger would not likely have known. For example, the man in the shroud is pierced through his wrists rather than through his palms. And this is almost certainly how Jesus was crucified, but medieval depictions of the crucifixion almost universally show the nail through the palm. Even if a medieval forger knew that the nails were likely driven through Jesus' wrists, if his intention was to fool people, he would have created an image that played to their expectations. He wouldn't have created an image based on historical accuracy. The image contains a lot of detail that cannot be seen by the naked eye. For example, when you examine it under ultraviolet light and magnification, the blood stains on the man's back resolve into individual wounds that are an excellent match for the wounds that would have been produced by a Roman flagrant, a type of whip. It's got a a leather handle with these individual cords, and at the end of each cord there's a dumbbell-shaped lead weight. Again, a medieval forger is not very likely to have known that, and even if a medieval forger knew how the wounds should look and came up with a clever technique to reproduce them, what would have been the point, since they can't be seen except using modern scientific techniques? The biggest mystery of all, however, is how the image was made. There are no paints, pigments, or dyes present on the shroud. There are no photosensitive chemicals, so there's no like silver nitrate or something that might have been used to produce a primitive photograph. The image is a scorch, present only on the uppermost surface of the fibers. There is a faint double image that appears on the back of the shroud, but no coloration in the middle of the fibers. So if you took an individual fiber of linen, you blew it up and cut it in cross-section, you'd have a very top of the fibers would be scorched. That creates the image. And you'd have a very faint double image underneath with no coloration penetrating from top to bottom. Recent analysis has shown that the image is like an X-ray, in that if, again, under analysis with scientific instruments, you can see the bones inside the body. Under UV light, areas of the shroud that were burned in a fire in 1527 will light up, but the image itself does not. So it was produced by a scorch, but it was produced by light only, light but no heat, which is, of course, a very unusual way to scorch anything. Many people have tried to reproduce the shroud image, and they've produced images that look to the naked eye like the shroud, but nobody's been able to produce an image that incorporates all of the features of the shroud using a scorching technique until maybe now. And here's the thing that's new. Scientists working for the Italian government fired lasers at small pieces of linen back in 2010. And at first, nothing happened. But as time passed, faint discoloration appeared on the cloth in the areas where a particular wavelength of light was applied. Essentially, those areas of the cloth are aging differently than the rest of the cloth. So the image is, it's they didn't do an image, they're just doing, applying the laser to create a mark. But that wasn't present at the outset. It comes present over time. A light without heat scorch, like that on the shroud, can now be produced using UV radiation with wavelengths less than 200 nanometers. The Italian team concluded that the shroud image could have been produced if two things happened. First, if the body gave off a flash of light in the right frequency. And second, if, as the body gave off this flash of light, it became mechanically transparent. That is, ghost-like, insubstantial, so that the linen collapsed through the body. So imagine if the feet are here and the head is here and the linen is wrapped lengthwise around. In the moment that the flash occurs, the linen collapses through the body. That's how you get the X-ray effect and the double image underneath. If those two things occurred, then you could have an image like the shroud. So to do that today, we might be able to reproduce an image, but we'd have to do it digitally. We would need thousands of UV lasers, we'd have to work in a vacuum, we'd need CAD-CAM technology, things that simply wouldn't have been available to a medieval forger. And I'll end with this. Paolo di Lazzaro, who was the lead scientist on the Italian team that did these laser tests in 2010, when they started to see the image years later, said this in 2015, after the coloration had appeared. The probability that the shroud is a fake is really very, very low. Thank you very much.